Welcome to the Codecast podcast. Real-world insights for your daily medical coding and billing processes. And now, here's your host, Terry Fletcher.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Codecast podcast. My name is Terry Fletcher. It is the last Tuesday of the month, and you know what that means. That means we are at Top 10 Tuesday, meaning that you're going to get to hear the top 10 coding questions for the month of February and how I respond to them. I was actually just going to edit out just now my phone that keeps blowing up, but you know, this is a podcast, meaning that you don't always have to edit everything. There's no rules, and you need to know that my phone blows up all the time, even when I put it on silent. It's kind of crazy. But it's a good weekend. I'm headed out to a concert shortly, so I want to get into our conversation today with regard to our coding questions. And it's been interesting because I have some questions that I haven't had in a long time that I get to address. A lot of them have to do with coding, but some have to do with some management issues that we want to talk about and make sure that we're clear on. So the first one says, Terry, we are receiving EOBs from Medicare in which the MIPS, and just so everybody knows what that is, that's the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System, in which our MIPS bonuses are being subtracted from the amount of the Medicare fee schedule for the procedure. So in other words, the Medicare fee schedule, the incentive, becomes the patient's obligation. Sometimes this is less than 20% required by the program. The balance is then sent to the Medigap, and again, for those of you that don't know what that is, that's the patient's secondary insurance, who pays the Medicare fee schedule the incentive payment. So CMS recognized this was a problem. I actually got a bulletin from them saying that, hello, we received, we discovered there was an error in the implementation of the 2019 MIPS payment system. And for the adjustment, it incorrectly applies the payments for Medicare Part B drugs and other non-physician services billed by physicians. They said it will impact you if we overpaid a claim. Based on this error, you will get a notification for recoupment from your MAC carrier, and if we underpaid the claim, it'll be adjusted, which apparently we're just supposed to trust them that they're going to do this. What I would recommend is when the payment does come in and you're trying to post it, make sure you post it to another account, not the patient's account, so that you can make sure that you're always getting your rightful incentive bonuses. So that was definitely a little bit annoying, to say the least, for a question I was starting to get. And my computer just blew up about that happening. And everybody is posting that differently, but just be aware of it when you look at your EOBs, when you're getting payments, because some of your payment posters may not understand what's happening with the adjustment or the adjustment codes. So be on top of that if you're an administrator or a billing manager or an office manager, etc. Number 2 says, my physician uses an ICD-10 diagnosis code for a neoplasm of uncertain behavior all the time, D48.5, but I noticed we are starting to get denials, and I'm wondering if D49.2 would be better. Okay, so first you have to make sure that you are reading the encounter for that day on what you're coding for. If you're coding for something post-pathology, then you have to go by what the definitive diagnosis is. So just know there's a before and after. Uncertain behavior neoplasms, I don't like those diagnoses because remember, those are pre-pathology diagnoses. So once something is uncertain behavior, that means the physician sent it to pathology to find out if it's cancerous or benign. So you look first at the code. So D49.2 is a neoplasm of uncertain behavior, and it says bone, soft tissue, and skin. So this means that the lesion or neoplasm is not only on the skin, but under the skin and part of the tissue and bone. The D48.5, which looks like what you're getting your denials on, is just uncertain behavior of the skin only, so it means surface. So what some of your payers may be saying is that you need to wait for pathology, and some payers do that. They don't like uncertain behavior of lesions or masses or lumps or anything like that, and they may be waiting for a clear diagnosis, again, either malignant or benign or other, but not uncertain behavior. So that could be the reason for the denial, and they want you to get a little bit more specific. I wouldn't look for a more specific uncertain behavior diagnosis, because then you have to look for properties of not only where it was, but what is it attached to. Otherwise, you'll be coding incorrectly. So number 3 brings us back to the new versus established patient. So I wrote an article for ICD-10 Monitor last week, And oh my gosh, that article blew up my computer with emails and phone calls and texts and posting. And I was like, everybody's totally freaking out here. What's going on? Well, apparently there was some conversations and some comments about the definition of new versus established patient. Well, you remember a few podcasts ago, I actually did that topic. And it was very popular. We had over 1,500 downloads for that topic. And usually our average downloads or listens per week are anywhere between 400 and 700. We've been really pushing the 700 lately, which I appreciate that, everybody. And so per week. And so it's just interesting when you get a topic that you think is something that's been out there for a long time and you write up an article on it and you get a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, we thought it was this or we thought it was that. So here's a question that comes in from it. And it says, Terry, that was a really nice article on new versus established patient. We appreciate that. Can you please share the source reference for the above that you stated? So the question was that came in is that this person, and they're not a Coding Corner client, but it was based on the article. So I thought I would include it in our top 10 this week. Her question was basically that they had a physician that took their patients to their practice and brought their patients with them. So he basically stopped practicing on his own, brought his patients to their practice, and their practice is a multi-physician practice, but of the same specialty. And so the question was, or one of my comments in the article was basically because that physician was coming forward, and I made a example of a pediatric situation, that those patients are now established to the new practice. Well, the question was, she says, years ago when I worked for another facility, we posed this question to our MAC educator, which is their Medicare carrier. And she replied that if the GI physician, they were gastro, if the GI physician patient first saw one of his new partners, the visit is a new patient visit. Of course, if the patient saw the original GI physician in the new practice, then the visit was established. And then the reasoning she gave us behind this appeared to be that there was no knowledge about the patient in the new practice for the visit, not in medical record, not in the physician's memory or experience. And so I've taught that ever since, but I'm happy to change, but I need to give them a reference as to why I would change. Okay, well, that's fair. Well, first of all, let's just take a look at this. So one of my biggest interpretive references or sources is the CPT book. That's where we get our codes. And if you can use CPT language without having to go outside of CPT to a society or a specialty group or, Medicare, I go to Medicare all the time, and Medicare has specific rules when it comes to certain things. But the CPT book is AMA, American Medical Association, and it's generic, meaning it applies to everybody. And so when you talk about new versus established patient under the AMA guidelines, it talks about the patient and the face-to-face. So the CPT book states under new and established patient, and I'm going to quote, solely for the purposes of distinguishing between new and established patients, professional services are those face-to-face services rendered by physicians. A new patient is one who has not received any professional services from the physician of the exact same specialty who belongs to the same group practice within the past 3 years. Okay, so when you take that definition and apply it to this question, my interpretation and my professional opinion, and basically what I can support if I have to appeal with an argument, is that once that gastrophysician joined that new practice, his patients came with him, and that is guilt by association as far as that face-to-face visit, and that took over. They are now part of that new practice, as is the physician, and the rules now apply. You didn't hear me saying the rules, but if you were seen in the hospital or if you were seen at another site, it doesn't say that. It says any face-to-face services in the past 3 years. And the GI physician that joined that practice saw those patients in the past 3 years. So his face-to-face extends to the new practice. Those patients are established to the practice, and all of the physicians of the same specialty, they're not new to them. And then also remember, the patients aren't the only ones that follow. the physician has to maintain the PHI, so the protected health information of those patients that he brought with them. So that would follow to the new practice at some point as well. And it shouldn't have any bearing on the definition of new versus established patient or how quickly it arrives at the practice. And think about this as well. When you have patients who are seen at the hospital and they're not seen by somebody else in your practice, and now they're coming back in and follow up with, say, within a year, and they're seeing somebody within your practice, that Medicare carrier's argument, or that MAC carrier educator that said, well, that other doctor didn't have knowledge of the patient. Well, sometimes your physician doesn't have knowledge of a patient who was seen a year ago in the hospital and never came back to the office, but that's still going to be established to the practice. Now, let me just play devil's advocate on this question. And this is what I said to the person that asked it. Let's say that he sold his practice to the new practice and didn't follow those patients. Then the MAC carrier would have actually been correct that there was no face-to-face with any physician who belongs in that group practice within the past 3 years. I know this can be a bit interpretive, but I can support this position if ever questioned or audited, and I could not support the scenario that was given to me. Also, the patient's, or I should say the physician's memory or experience is not a defensive position, because remember, they forget patients, not on purpose, but just because of pure volume. So know your definition of new versus established patient, and go back and read my article on ICD-10monitor.com and tell me what you think of it. I'd appreciate the feedback. So number 4, what is the difference between a right heart cath and a Swan-Ganz catheter? So, and the statement also includes the codes 93451 and 93503. So the right heart cath, that's for pulmonary function. It's the right side of the heart with possible lung involvement. You might see pulmonary hypertension, and they're taking measurements, but this is what we call diagnostic, and it's in the cath lab. And so the catheter is typically taken out after pressure measurements are taken on that right side of the heart, and your code is 93451, and if done in a facility setting, not your office, you need a 26 modifier. Now, a Swan-Ganz catheter, that's a similar catheter. It's a flow-directed catheter, and it's used to determine on very acute patients if they have certain heart and lung abnormalities. So it is left in to continue to monitor the hemodynamics of that patient. The doctor may be checking for fluid in the lungs, which is also called pulmonary edema, or this could be done after a heart attack or to monitor the patient before a heart transplant. And it's also typically done at bedside, and the catheter is left in for a couple days. So the rule of thumb is if they leave it in, then it's considered a Swan. If they take it out, then it's probably a right heart cath. So make sure you're reading the report and understanding the nature of why the patient's getting it done. It's the same catheter used for 2 different purposes, 2 different codes. So if it was a Swan, it would be 93503 with no modifier. And there's a big difference in reimbursement in these 2 codes, so you need to know what you're doing. Another question comes up. It says, a patient has a STEMI heart attack, so that means emergent in nature, and is brought to the cath lab for an emergent intervention, and the intervention only ends up to be a successful balloon angioplasty. So basically, they opened up that narrowed artery and tried to find that culprit lesion to get the blood flowing back into that area. Would you bill a 92920 angioplasty only coronary, or would you bill the 92941, which is a percutaneous coronary intervention during an acute MI? I would actually bill the 92941. CPT assistant said that you have to have an emergent in nature, which is STEMI protocol, and it can be one or a combination of intervention. So you're fine to bill the 92941 on that. I would also remind you to make sure that you use a vessel modifier so you know exactly where it is. That just gives a little bit more specificity. Number 6 says, hi, Terry, what is the Watchman procedure? I'm being asked to pre-cert it, and I have no idea what it is. So I was part of a patent pending, and now it's fully patented, procedure a long time ago, and it's called a left atrial appendage, and it's kind of like a plug implant. And what this was, it used to be a T code, but effective January 1st, 2017, physicians now can report what they call the Watchman implant procedure using the 33340 code. And this is a percutaneous transcatheter closure of a left atrial appendage, so a hole, with a endocardial implant, including fluoroscopy, transseptal puncture, catheter placement. Basically, it includes everything, angiography, etc. And so it has 0 global days, which was helpful. We thought actually they were going to put some global days on there. It's worth about $800 depending on your payer. So just keep that in mind. Along with primary diagnosis codes of I-48.0, which would be proximal AFib. You might have I-48.1, persistent AFib. But they're looking for atrial fibrillation. I think chronic atrial fibrillation does pay, unspecified would get kicked out. And it's still under a clinical trial, even though we now have a Category 1 CPT code. Number 7 says, "Hi, Terry. I'm so excited to participate in your webinar this week on collection and appeals. Thank you very much. I'm happy to have you sign up. In the meantime, I have a question on an abdominal aortogram with runoff. My physician wants to code a 75630, and I think it should be 75625. Who's correct?" Okay. So the 75630 says abdominal aortogram with serialography, which means multiple views, and it says with bilateral iliofem runoff. So iliacs are your thigh, pelvis area. Femorals, that's anything on your legs above your knee. And then if it bilateral means both legs or both extremities, I should probably be a little more clinical there. So if there was one high catheter placement, let's say at the level of the renals or what we like to call the proximal aorta, and then dye ran down the aorta, down past the bifurcation of where the legs split off, where both legs split off, and angiographic data supported abdominal aorta information and bilateral extremity imaging information, then I would code 75630. If it's in the facility setting, you need a 26 modifier. If it was 2 injections, and sometimes in the cath lab, the step change table means that they have to reposition the patient or it's too short to just do 1 injection. So they would have 1 injection high, that proximal aorta, and that's called an abdominal aortogram, 75625. Again, you're going to need a 26 modifier. And then they would sometimes pull down the catheter, usually a pigtail. And they'll put it at what I call the bifurcation. That's where the legs split off. And then they'll do another injection and let dye run down, typically to past the knee, but same concept. And you would have a second code, 75716, with a 26 modifier. And so that's for a bilateral extremity angiogram. So if it is 1 injection high and you let dye run down and you get data for both the aorta and the extremities, 75630, your physician would be correct. But if it is high and low injections and you're getting both the aorta and the lower extremities, you'd have 2 codes. The one you said, 75625, and then you also need to capture the lower extremity angiography at 75716. So now we're switching to gastro. So question number 8 says, what is the correct code for a colonoscopy by snare and moderate sedation using propofol medicine for 20 minutes? I'm new to gastro coding and having a hard time finding the correct codes. Okay, so first of all, your colonoscopy by snare, or means you're removing a polyp, is 45385. But you said something in your question that is not accurate, and I just wanted to clarify. First of all, propofol is not considered a moderate sedation medicine. It's considered a monitored sedation medicine or general anesthesia. And so it puts patients to sleep. Remember, moderate sedation means patients are lucid and awake. They may not remember anything, but you're not using moderate sedation, you're using monitored sedation. And for lower abdominal services, almost said lower extremities, lower abdominal services, you need the general anesthesia code 00811. It's actually new it was new for 2018. And then also you'll need patient status codes and ASA class status for anesthesia. Remember, anesthesia coding has a lot of components to it. Number 9 says, Terry, we have a patient who swears she has fibroids because her mom had them, but we have done test after test and she does not have them. She is asymptomatic, but still insists she thinks she has fibroids. How do we code this encounter? What would her diagnosis be? I've had a patient like this before in a couple of practices that I've worked with, and it's called worried well, meaning that it's a person that is encountering health services who has a feared condition where there was no diagnosis made, or what it's called, which was not demonstrated. And that actually has a diagnosis code, Z71.1. Now, I can't guarantee that code is going to get you paid, but at least you can say why they're coming in lieu of having any kind of complaint. And we know we need to have some kind of complaint sometimes for that to get paid. Question number 10. Terry, we have a question regarding X modifiers. What's the difference between the XE and the XP? Can you please give an example? Okay, so the X modifiers, what those are, and let me just explain what a modifier is for those of you that are new to coding. So in Appendix A of your CPT book, a CPT modifier provides the means to report or indicate that a service or procedure that has been performed has been altered by some specific circumstance, but is not changed in its definition or description of the code. Modifiers also enable healthcare professionals to effectively respond to payment policy requirements established by other entities. So a HCPCS modifier is alphanumeric, but a CPT modifier is numeric. So we've heard of the 25 modifier, for example. We append that sometimes to an E&M service, a visit code, on the same day as a procedure to protect that code and show a significant separate service. Well, in answer to question 10, what are the X modifiers? Okay, so we have a little bit of a crossover here. So in 2015, Medicare came out, 2017, I apologize. In 2017, Medicare came out and basically said, okay, we are going to have what we call subset modifiers, and they are going to be, I call them kind of the stepbrothers of the 59 modifier. And so what that means, they only did this one-time transmittal, which I couldn't believe it. They even had an FAQ about it, and they were incorrect on 2 ways to use it. So what an X modifier is, it is a subset modifier of the 59 modifier. Now, the 59 modifier says distinct procedural service. So sometimes we have to reflect that there are services that are performed together, procedural, not visit codes, that need to be reported together, but there may be an edit with Medicare or another payer saying that if you report them together, they're going to get kicked out. So what these X modifiers do is they allow the coder, so you or the biller, when you're putting them into and attaching them to a procedure, to kind of explain what's happening with that procedure a little bit clearer than if you're just using the 59 modifier. So just to be clear, you're going to use the X modifiers instead of the 59. And let me give an example as was asked. So the XE modifier means separate encounter. The XP modifier means separate practitioner. The XS modifier means separate service, and the XU means non-overlapping service. Okay, so I know those are weird. So for an example here, I'm going to use a GI example. Let's say you had a patient that had that snare that we talked of earlier. So they had a colonoscopy by snare, and then the physician who did that put the patient on observation and said, you're going to be discharged in about 3 hours. Okay, so within that 3-hour time, the patient developed a spontaneous bleed. And that's why they put the patients on observation after colonoscopy, just to make sure that there's nothing happening within that intestinal area. Because remember, whenever you have a foreign material in that patient, you have a catheter or a scope or anything like that, it's got a little sharp edge on it, and it could cause a spontaneous bleed, something that needs to be cauterized or injected, or to stop the bleeding, you've got to do something. So let's say the same physician went back in at a separate encounter to stop the bleeding. Then I would code the 45382, which is a colonoscopy with control of bleeding, any method, by the physician that went back, but I would append the modifier XE for separate encounter. So same physician went back. But let's say that physician was no longer on call. So that patient's physician that did the original colonoscopy wasn't on call. And so a new physician, maybe same group, actually would have to be same group for the modifier to work. But a new physician within that group, same specialty, basically they're now on call and they went back in and controlled the bleeding through colonoscopy. I would use XP, separate practitioner, because that actually says of the same group. And so this gets a little bit more clarification instead of the 59, because let's just say you put a 59 on it. What that could tell the insurance company is that you were trying to code for a colonoscopy by snare and a colonoscopy with control of bleeding at the same encounter, and that's not payable. So that's actually incidental. But if it's a spontaneous bleed later on or at a separate encounter, then you can code for it. So you also have to know the rules when it comes to those services. I use the XU modifier in heart caths. So because a lot of cath possibles are done, meaning that we do a diagnostic heart cath that determines the need for an intervention. And so I actually mentioned it last week when I was talking about a little bit of a collection letter. And so to reflect to a payer that it is not overlapping, then I will use the XU modifier on the cath. So it's just these things, and mainly because there's also an edit. It's just these little things that can be a little bit helpful, and I appreciate that question on the X modifiers. You just never know when you're going to use them, but that's a couple of scenarios. And also, I will have that in my upcoming collection and appeals webinar, which is still available. We have some spots left. It's filling up fast for this Thursday, so please see my website at terryfletcher.net if you are interested in still taking that webinar. So we would love to have you. So our Top 10 Tuesday coding questions were brought to you by Simple Health Radio, bringing you health topics each week on the radio podcast at simplehealthradio.com. Also, Movado Watches, one of the world's leading watchmakers. Movado, modern, ahead of its time, Movado.com. Which leads to my personal insight this week. I am wearing one of the new watches from their Movado Bold collection as we speak. It's stainless steel, cobalt blue, and I absolutely love it. So thanks, a shout out to them, not only for being a sponsor, but for sending me a beautiful watch. And also a reminder here that we would like you to like our Facebook page under Terry Fletcher Consulting if you can. And also, I really appreciate all the feedback I'm getting from the podcast. So, shout out to, everyone who emails me or contacts me through however you do that. I really appreciate that. It's great to hear from you. But if you could also do me a great favor, I would appreciate it if you could, on whatever platform you listen to, can you please give us a rating and also leave a review? We would love that. I know that Apple really appreciates that, and it helps keep us as the #1 health and business podcast genre. We're almost at 40,000 listeners as of this week, and we really appreciate that. We're over 100 listeners on YouTube, which that's growing really fast. So I didn't even realize that people listen to YouTube. I figure you just watch videos on there. So when my podcast producer, Joe, said, do you see your numbers on YouTube? I was like, wow, this is great. So everywhere you guys are listening, we really appreciate you. We're also going to have some merchandise in the next month or so. Somebody said, do you do t-shirts on your what you say when you leave every podcast? And actually we do. So if you want a t-shirt or a sweatshirt that says, make it a great day, email me, let us know, and we'll get you one right out. So everyone, that's my sign off. Make it a great day, and we'll talk to you next week on the Codecast podcast.
For more information on medical coding, billing, auditing, and compliance, including how to hire Terry, follow Terry on Twitter at TerryCoder1 or visit her website at www.terryfletcher.net. Podcast producer Joe Kuzma. Music producer Dassassin Music.